For months, a little girl asked strangers one question, showing a worn locket. They all turned away. Then she asked the wrong man, or the right one. When the Mafia boss opened it, he saw a photo of himself 20 years younger, standing beside the woman he watched die in a fire. The girl was Sophia, an 8-year-old orphan surviving on the streets. The man was Don Vincent Romano, a man who built his empire on control and buried his heart 2 decades ago. In that instant, his entire past, a tragedy he thought was sealed, was ripped open. The question was no longer, is this my daddy? It was, how is this possible? And what does this child's existence mean for every enemy he's ever made? 2 decades earlier, a fire consumed a brownstone in Little Italy. The official report declared it an accident, faulty wiring in the basement. Only one body was found, burned beyond recognition, identified as Elena Morti, Vincent's pregnant fiancée. He buried her on a Tuesday, and by Thursday, the war that made him Don Romano had begun. The grief hardened into armor, the rage into empire. He never remarried. He never looked at another photograph of her, until today. In the stunned silence of the restaurant, Vincent's hand did not shake. That was the first sign of danger. His men, 2 tables over, had half risen, hands inside their jackets. But he merely closed the locket with a soft click, his eyes never leaving the girl's face. He saw Elena's chin, her widow's peak. He saw his own dark eyes looking back. "What is your name?" His voice was calm, a velvet-covered blade. "Sophia," she whispered, her small hands twisting in her threadbare dress. He stood, a mountain of expensive wool and controlled violence, and placed a hand on her shoulder. To the onlookers, it might have looked paternal. To his men, it was a claim. "You will come with me now." There was no question in it. Sophia, who had been ignored by 100 strangers, simply nodded, placing her tiny hand in his. As they walked out, his consigliere, Frank Russo, materialized at his side, his voice a low murmur. "Vincent, what are you doing?" "We have a meeting with the Colombians in 20 minutes. Vincent didn't break stride. "Cancel it, and find out everything about St. Agnes's orphanage, who runs it, who funds it, every child who's entered or left in the last 8 years. The Romano estate was a fortress of stone and silence. Maria, Vincent's wife of 15 years, met them in the grand foyer. Her smile froze when she saw the child clinging to Vincent's hand. "Vincent, who is this?" "This is Sophia," he said, his tone leaving no room for inquiry. "She will be staying with us. Have the blue room prepared. Call Dr. Rixe for a full examination." Maria's eyes flashed with a confusion that bordered on hurt, but years as a Mafia wife had trained her in compliance. She simply nodded, her gaze lingering on the girl's ragged dress. In his study, Vincent placed the locket on his desk under a stark lamp. The photo was small, faded at the edges, but unmistakable. It was him in his mid-20s, his arm around a beaming Elena, her hand resting on a visibly pregnant belly. He remembered the day it was taken, a street festival the summer before the fire. He had given her the locket the following week. "So she would always have us close," he'd said. He thought it had burned with her. The forensic certainty of that day began to crack. If the locket survived, what else did? Meanwhile, in the blue room, a terrified Sophia was being examined by the family doctor. Clara, the household nurse, a woman with her own tragic past and a hardened kindness, noted the girl's malnutrition, the old bruises on her ribs, the defensive scar on her forearm. But she also noted something else. "She has your wife's asthma," Clara said quietly to Maria outside the door. "The same inhaler, the same triggers. It's unusually specific." Maria paled. The medical history was a private family matter. Frank's report came that evening. St. Agnes's was a church-run orphanage, poorly funded. Sophia had been left on its steps as an infant, wrapped in a blanket with only this locket pinned to her clothes. No note. The records showed sporadic care, and she'd run away 6 months prior. The trail went cold. "But here's the thing, boss," Frank said, leaning forward. "The orphanage received a sizable anonymous donation every year for the last 8 years, 100,000. Always in cash, always delivered the same week, the anniversary of the fire." Vincent's world, built on a foundation of settled history, began to tilt. The fire wasn't an accident. Elena hadn't died. His child, this silent, watchful girl, had been born, hidden, and then abandoned. But by whom? And why stage a death so elaborate, only to leave a clue as damning as a photograph? Confronted Sophia that night, sitting beside her in the lavish bedroom that felt like a gilded cage. "Who gave you the locket, Sophia?" She stared at him, those old soul eyes too knowing for an 8-year-old. "It was always mine. Sister Agnes said it was with my blanket. And you showed it to people, asked if the man was your daddy." She nodded. "Sister Agnes said to find him, that he would protect me." "From what?" Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. "From the bad men who came to the orphanage at night. The ones who took the other kids away, and they never came back." A cold fury settled in Vincent's bones. The orphanage wasn't just a cover, it was a hunting ground, and his daughter had been living in it. He had Frank post 4 men at her door, but the real threat, he knew, wasn't outside the gates. It was the rot within his own understanding of the past. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone who knew about the fire, about Alina, about the child. Someone who had been watching and paying for 8 years. The first attack came not with guns, but with paper. The next morning, an envelope arrived at the estate, no postmark, hand-delivered. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Alina alive, standing on a street in Buenos Aires. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, but smiling. The date stamp on a newspaper stand in the corner read just 3 months prior. Attached was a note typed. "Some fires are meant to cleanse. You didn't lose everything, Vincent. You just misplaced it. We have her. Keep the girl quiet, or we finish what the fire started." Vincent Romano, the man who feared nothing, felt a terror he hadn't known since he was a boy. His wife was alive. His enemies had her. And the little girl upstairs, asking for a glass of water, was no longer just a shocking revelation. She was the only bargaining chip he had in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The war for his past had just begun, and the first shot had been fired 20 years too late. Vincent did the one thing his enemies never expected. He showed the note to Maria. His wife of 15 years stared at the photo of Alina, her face a storm of betrayal and dawning horror. "All these years," she whispered, "our marriage, a lie built on a lie." But then her eyes hardened and she made a calculation only a mafia wife could make. "We get her back," Maria said. "We bring her home. Then we burn whoever did this to the ground." The Romano machine, built for narcotics and extortion, now pivoted to a single target, the truth. Vincent's network in Argentina was activated. Within 48 hours, grainy surveillance footage from a Buenos Aires cafe confirmed Alina's presence. She was living under the name Isabella Marquez in a modest apartment in the Palermo district. She was not under visible guard. She went to market, she read in the park. She was, by all appearances, a free woman living in plain sight. This was the second shock. She wasn't a prisoner, she was in hiding. The implication was a blade twisting in Vincent's gut. She had chosen to disappear. She had chosen to let him mourn her, to let their daughter grow up in an orphanage. The grief he had worn like armor for 2 decades was suddenly hollow, a performance for an audience of one. Ray, white and pure, began to simmer beneath his cold exterior. But a more pressing question emerged. If she was free, why was she hiding? And from whom? The answer came from an unexpected source, Sophia herself. The child, slowly unfurling in the safety of the estate, began to talk during her sessions with Clara. She described the bad men at the orphanage with a chilling specificity. They wore nice shoes, she said. They had tattoos of birds on their hands. They would pick a child, take them to the city, and bring them back days later, quiet and sick. One boy, she said, never came back at all. Clara, connecting dots with a nurse's clinical dread, recognized the pattern. This wasn't random predation. This was trafficking, and the orphanage was a farm. Frank's investigation into the anonymous donations hit a wall. The cash was untraceable, delivered by a dead drop system used by intelligence agencies. But his forensic accountant found a ghost in the machine, a shell company that had paid the orphanage's property taxes for a decade. That company was linked, through a daisy chain of 9 intermediaries, to a holding fund in Luxembourg. And that fund had one signatory with a name that made Frank's blood run cold: Antonio the Ghost Morty. Alina's brother. the man Vincent had personally killed in the war that followed the fire. The past wasn't just a lie, it was a hall of mirrors. Antonio was supposed to be dead, buried in an unmarked grave after a bloody shootout in a Jersey warehouse. Vincent had seen the body. He had ordered the burial, yet here was his financial signature, active and moving money a month ago. The pivot was tectonic. The enemy wasn't a rival family. It was a ghost from his own, a man back from the grave with 20 years to plan his revenge. And he had started by stealing Vincent's family. Vincent called a council of war. His most trusted captains sat around the table, but the atmosphere was poison. The news of Alina's survival and Antonio's return was a shockwave that threatened the very myth of Vincent's invincibility. Jimmy, the knife Castellano, voiced the unthinkable. "Boss, if Antonio's alive, then the war never ended. We've been sleeping while he's been building, and he's built a plaything out of your past." Tony, ever loyal, slammed a fist on the table. "We find him. We finish the job." But Frank, uncharacteristically quiet, posed the dangerous question. "Why now? Why send the girl to you now after all this time? He's handing you a piece of the puzzle. That's not revenge. That's an invitation." The invitation became a summons. A second package arrived, this time at Frank's home address, a clear message that nowhere was safe. It contained a burner phone and a single keycard for a storage facility in Queens. The phone rang exactly 1 minute after Frank opened the box. Vincent answered. The voice on the other end was digitally scrambled, but the cadence was hauntingly familiar. "Hello, Vincent, miss me?" It was Antonio's voice, or a perfect mockery of it. "You have something I want." "I have something you want. Let's trade the girl for the mother. A simple family reunion." Vincent's reply was ice. "You staged her death. You stole my child." The distorted voice chuckled. "I saved her life from you. Your war, your world was a poison. I gave her a chance to be clean, but now circumstances have changed. The girl is a liability. Bring her to the storage locker, alone. Any backup and Alina dies screaming." The line went dead. The storage facility was a trap. Every instinct screamed it, but it was also the only lead to Alina. Vincent devised a counterplay. He would send a decoy, a lookalike girl in a hooded coat, escorted by Frank and a small team. He would watch from a surveillance van 2 blocks away, ready to pounce on anyone who showed. It was a sound tactical plan. It was also exactly what Antonio anticipated. On a rain-slicked night in Queens, the decoy team entered the storage facility. The unit was empty except for a single laptop on the floor. When Frank opened it, a live video feed filled the screen. It showed Alina, bound to a chair in a bare concrete room. A masked figure stood behind her with a knife. And then the feed split, showing a second camera angle, a live view of the Romano estate's garden, where the real Sofia was playing with Clara, unaware she was being watched from the bushes. The message was clear: "I am inside your walls." Frank's voice crackled over the radio tense. "It's a setup, boss. He's not here. He's—" The transmission dissolved into static as a coordinated electronic jamming wave hit the entire block. In the van, Vincent's screens fizzed to gray. At that exact moment, back at the estate, the perimeter alarm screamed. The attack was not on the decoy. It was on the source. Men in black tactical gear, faces obscured, swarmed the garden from 3 sides. Their movements were precise, military. Clara threw herself over Sofia, dragging her toward the house as bullets chewed the earth around them. The estate's guards, caught in a deadly crossfire, fought back with ferocity. But the attackers weren't there to kill. They were there to grab. One of them lunged, his hand closing around Sofia's ankle. Clara, with a strength born of pure terror, smashed a garden stone into his face. She grabbed the girl and ran, bursting through the kitchen door as Maria barricaded it behind them. The assault lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Then, as suddenly as they came, the attackers vanished into the night, leaving 2 dead guards and a estate scarred by gunfire. They had failed to take Sofia, but they had succeeded in delivering Antonio's true message. Your home is not a sanctuary. Your people are not safe. Your power is an illusion. In the aftermath, standing amidst the chaos, Vincent examined a single piece of evidence left behind. One of the attackers had been shot in the leg, leaving a blood trail that vanished at the estate's eastern wall. Clutched in the dead man's hand was not a weapon, but a small, faded holy card, the exact kind placed in caskets at Italian funerals. On the back, in familiar handwriting, were 3 words: "For my sister." The war was no longer a shadow from the past. It was in his home, bleeding on his lawn. And the next move, Vincent knew, would not be an invitation. It would be an annihilation. He had to find Alina before Antonio decided she was more valuable dead than alive. And he had to do it without knowing which of his own men was feeding the ghost his secrets. The holy card was a taunt, but the blood was a trail. Vincent's forensic team found a rare antibiotic in the attacker's system, a drug used to treat a specific strain of infection found in only 2 hospitals in the tri-state area. One was a public facility. The other was the private clinic where Frank Russo's brother-in-law worked as head of security. The coincidence was a grenade with the pin already pulled. Vincent's trust, already fractured, shattered. He called Frank into his study and placed the lab report on the desk without a word. Frank read it, his face draining of color. "Vincent, you can't believe my brother-in-law is a desk jockey. He doesn't have the access, the spine for this." Vincent's voice was terrifyingly quiet. "Then explain how a dead man knows my security rotations, Frank. How he knew we'd send a decoy to Queens." For a long moment, Frank said nothing. Then, with the heaviness of a condemned man, he confessed, not to betrayal, but to blindness. "2 months ago, my nephew got into trouble, gambling debts, the kind that get you kneecapped. The debt disappeared overnight. I thought it was you, showing mercy. I never asked." It was a classic play, compromise a man through his family. Antonio hadn't turned Frank. He had turned Frank's blind spot into a surveillance post. Every worried conversation Frank had with his brother-in-law about the estate's security, every detail about Sophia's routine, had been harvested. The mole wasn't in the organization. It was in its shadow. Vincent's response was a masterclass in cold strategy. He didn't fire Frank. He didn't exile him. He promoted him. In a very public meeting, he placed Frank in charge of the Alina recovery operation, with a massive budget and visible authority. It was a poison chalice. If Frank was clean, he'd catch the real leak trying to sabotage him. If he was dirty, he'd lead them right to Antonio. It was a gamble that turned his oldest friend into both weapon and target. Meanwhile, Clara, operating on a nurse's instinct and a survivor's paranoia, took Sophia to the estate's seldom-used panic room, a vault-like space behind the library shelves. There, away from prying eyes, the girl finally broke. Sobbing, she told Clara about the nice lady who visited the orphanage once a year. A lady who cried when she looked at Sophia, who always brought a yellow blanket, and who told Sister Agnes to make sure Sophia kept the locket safe. The description matched Alina. She hadn't abandoned her daughter. She had been checking on her, funding her safety through Antonio for 8 years. She was a mother in exile, not by choice, but by lethal necessity. This revelation reframed everything. Antonio wasn't just a vengeful brother. He was Alina's protector. The fire had been meant for both of them. Someone else had wanted them dead. Antonio had faked Alina's death to save her, taken the unborn child and hidden them both. But why? What did Alina know that was worth such an elaborate charade? The answer arrived in the form of a memory, jolted loose by stress. Maria, while going through old family photo albums to distract Sophia, found a picture from Vincent and Alina's engagement party. In the background, chatting amiably with Alina's father, was a young city councilman named Arthur Bradford. Bradford was now the frontrunner in the mayoral election, a tough on crime, reformer who had built his career dismantling organized crime networks. And his biggest, most publicized victory had been the conviction of the Morty family's financial architect, a case that had collapsed after the key witness, Alina's father, died in the fire. The pieces crashed together with the force of a train wreck. The fire wasn't a mob hit. It was a political cleanup. Bradford, then a rising star in the district attorney's office, had used the Morty family to launder dirty campaign money through their construction fronts. Elena's father had discovered it and was ready to talk. Bradford couldn't have a witness, so he had the problem erased. Antonio, realizing the depth of the threat, had staged his sister's death to save her from a politician who would keep coming until every loose end was tied off, permanently. But wait, it got worse. Frank, now running his poison operation, dug into the orphanage's city permits and found a shocking link. The zoning variance that allowed St. Agnes's to operate as a group home had been pushed through by none other than City Councilman Arthur Bradford. The orphanage wasn't just a front for trafficking. It was Bradford's personal blackmail factory. He used it to house the children of people he needed to control or to source assets for his powerful allies. Sophia hadn't been hidden there by chance. She had been placed there as a threat, a living piece of leverage against Antonio to ensure his continued silence and cooperation. Antonio sending Sophia to Vincent was a nuclear option. He was throwing Bradford's leverage into the one man's hands who had the power and the motive to destroy him. The game was no longer a family feud. It was a political assassination in slow motion, with Vincent's family as the pawns. Bradford couldn't allow Vincent to connect him to the fire, the orphanage, or the trafficking. And with Elena alive and possibly ready to talk, and her daughter now under the protection of a vengeful mafia boss, Bradford's entire empire was on the brink of exposure. The politician made his move, not with guns but with badges. The following morning, a task force of federal agents and city police, armed with a warrant signed by a judge on Bradford's payroll, surrounded the Romano estate. The charge was not murder or racketeering. It was child endangerment and kidnapping. They demanded the immediate surrender of Sophia Romano, citing an anonymous tip that she was being held against her will by a known criminal. It was a brilliant public move. If Vincent fought, he'd be a kidnapper shooting at cops. If he complied, he'd be handing his daughter directly to the man who wanted her dead. Standing at the gate, Vincent faced the federal agent in charge. Behind him, Maria held a trembling Sophia, and Clara stood ready with a medical kit, as if it were a shield. Vincent knew this was the end game. Bradford was forcing him to choose between his daughter's immediate safety and her long-term survival. Giving her up was a death sentence. Keeping her meant war with the state. Then, from the second-floor window, Frank Russo made a call. Not to a soldier, but to a reporter at the Asterisk New York Chronicle. He fed her a single, explosive lead. City Councilman Arthur Bradford is the secret benefactor of St. Agnes's orphanage. Ask him about the children who went missing. Ask him about the fire in Little Italy 20 years ago. He hung up as the first police cruiser's radio crackled with the news desk's frantic call to the precinct for comment. In that moment of chaos, as the police line wavered, Vincent made his choice. He stepped forward, not with a gun, but with a lawyer's phone number and an icy smile. "She's not going anywhere," he said to the federal agent. "But tell Councilman Bradford he can have his meeting, just him and me. 1 hour, neutral ground. Or the next call my consigliere makes is to the U.S. attorney with bank records." It was a bluff built on a fragment of truth, but it worked. The police, their operation suddenly politically radioactive, staged a tactical withdrawal. The reprieve was temporary, bought with the promise of a confrontation. Vincent had just agreed to walk into a room with the man who had destroyed his life. But he was no longer walking in blind. He was walking in with the only weapon Bradford feared, the truth, and a father with nothing left to lose. The personal war was over. The war for the city's soul had begun. The meeting was set for midnight at the abandoned waterfront terminal, a place of ghosts and broken deals. Vincent went alone, but he was never truly alone. Frank, reinstated by his act of defiance, had a sniper team on the adjacent roof. Tony had a dozen men in the surrounding warehouses. And in a van 2 blocks away, Clara and Maria monitored every word via a wire, ready to trigger the escape plan. They were prepared for a shootout, for a double cross. They were not prepared for the man who stepped out of the shadows. It was not Arthur Bradford, it was Antonio Morti. He emerged from the darkness, his face gaunt and scarred, but unmistakably alive. The man Vincent had buried 2 decades ago stood before him, aged by hardship, not by peace. "Hello, Vincent," Antonio said, his voice raw. "You brought an army, I brought the truth." He held up a digital recorder. Everything. The fire, the payoffs, the orphanage, the names of every child Bradford sold. It's all here. Vincent's hand hovered near his weapon. "Where is Alina?" "Safe, for now, but Bradford knows she's the key. He has men hunting her in Buenos Aires as we speak. He thinks if she dies, the past dies with her." Antonio took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "I faked her death to save her. I took your child to protect her. I have been her jailer and her guardian for 20 years. I am so tired, Vincent." The story Antonio told was one of impossible choices. Bradford, then a corrupt assistant DA, had embezzled millions through Morty construction projects. When Alina and their father discovered the scheme and threatened to go to the feds, Bradford ordered a hit. Antonio intercepted the order. The fire was set by Bradford's men, but Antonio got Alina out through a back alley, leaving a Jane Doe casualty from the city morgue in her place. He smuggled a pregnant Alina to Argentina, where Sofia was born. But Bradford's reach was long. He tracked them. So Antonio made a deal. He would return to New York, pretend to be dead, and run the orphanage as a source of blackmail material for Bradford. In return, Alina and Sofia would be left alone. He had been a ghost, managing a nightmare to keep his sister alive. But the deal soured, Antonio said, his voice breaking. Bradford started taking the children, selling them. I couldn't stop him. The only card I had left was you. I sent Sofia to you because you were the only force he feared, the only one who could burn his empire down and not care about the fallout. Vincent understood then. The locket wasn't just an identifier. It was a distress flare from a ghost, a father's last hope for his child. "What do you need?" Vincent asked. Antonio handed him the recorder. "Get this to the FBI field office. The agent in charge is clean, I checked. Then create the loudest, bloodiest diversion you can muster. Draw every one of Bradford's enforcers into the open. While they're focused on you, I'll extract Alina from Buenos Aires. Your men can help." It was a plan that played to Vincent's strengths, chaos and violence. He agreed. The diversion was a masterpiece of calculated terror. Vincent's men simultaneously hit 3 of Bradford's hidden counting houses, 2 of his mistress's apartments, and the campaign headquarters. It was a blatant, screaming declaration of war that couldn't be ignored. Bradford's private army, a mix of off-duty cops and hired mercenaries, mobilized en masse, scrambling to protect the politicians' assets. While New York lit up with street fights and sirens, Antonio, with a team of Vincent's most discreet soldiers, landed in Buenos Aires. They stormed the safe house where Alina was being held by Bradford's remaining guards. The firefight was short and brutal. Antonio kicked in the door to find Alina, not cowering but holding a knife to a guard's throat. 20 years of hiding had not broken her. It had forged her into a survivor. Brother and sister embraced for the first time in 2 decades, in a room smelling of cordite and hope. Back in New York, Vincent delivered the recorder to the FBI. The evidence was damning and exhaustive. Arrest warrants were drawn up for Arthur Bradford on charges of murder, conspiracy, kidnapping, and corruption. But Bradford, sensing the net closing, made a final, desperate play. He went to the one place he thought Vincent would never attack, the Romano estate. He came not with soldiers, but with a news crew, positioning himself on the public street, claiming Vincent Romano was framing him to sabotage his anti-crime campaign. It was a brazen, live televised gambit. Vincent, watching from his study, saw his daughter peering out the window at the commotion. He made a decision. He walked out the front gate alone into the glare of the cameras. Bradford smiled, a politician's smile, and began his spiel. "This man is a criminal and Vincent cut him off, his voice calm and clear. "You ordered the fire that killed an innocent woman. You turned an orphanage into a slave market. You took children. You took my family." Then Vincent did something no one expected. He turned to the cameras and said, "I am Vincent Romano. I have done terrible things and I will answer for them. But this man," he pointed at Bradford, "he hides behind a badge and a slogan. He is the real monster. The evidence is with the FBI. Let the world see." In that moment, Vincent sacrificed his own myth to ensure Bradford's destruction. The footage aired live. The FBI, their hand forced by the public spectacle, moved in and arrested Bradford on camera, reading him his rights as he screamed about conspiracies. The fallout was swift. Bradford's empire collapsed. The orphanage was shuttered, its remaining children placed in proper care. Antonio and Alina returned to New York under federal protection as key witnesses. The reunion between Vincent and Alina was held in a secure FBI conference room. There were no dramatic speeches. She looked at the man she had loved, now a stranger hardened by a different life, and she saw their daughter in his eyes. "Thank you for keeping her safe," Alina said. Vincent nodded. "Thank you for giving her life." The final, surprising detail emerged in the weeks that followed. During the federal debriefings, a forensic audit of Bradford's finances revealed a dormant trust fund. It had been set up in Sophia's name at her birth, funded by Antonio with every penny he could skim from Bradford's operations over 20 years. The amount was just over $2 million. It was not blood money. It was redemption money, a father's silent promise for a future he hoped she would have. Sophia Romano, the little girl with the locket, was now the heir to a small fortune and a legacy of survival. The new normal was a fragile thing. Vincent faced indictment for his crimes, but with his cooperation and Bradford's fall, he negotiated a deal. Significant time, but in a protective facility with the possibility of parole. Maria stood by him, her loyalty now a choice, not a trap. Alina and Antonio entered witness protection, but with a provision: supervised visits with Sophia. Clara was offered a permanent position as Sophia's guardian and tutor, a job she accepted without hesitation. On a cold, clear morning before Vincent surrendered to authorities, he sat in the garden with Sophia. She wore the locket, now polished and gleaming. "Will you come back?" she asked. He took her hand. "I will do everything I can to come home to you, but you have a big family now, Piccolina. Your mother, your uncle, Clara, Maria, they will keep you safe." Sophia hugged him, and for the first time since she walked into that restaurant, the question was answered. She knew who her daddy was. The war that began with a fire ended not with a bullet, but with a choice: to protect rather than possess. The empire of fear was gone. In its place stood a family, broken and mended, bound not by blood alone, but by the desperate, enduring love that had outlasted fire, lies, and 20 lost years. The locket that started it all sits on a dresser in a sunlit room now, a relic of a war fought in shadows. It no longer asks a question. It tells a story of a love that survived a fire, of a brother's impossible sacrifice, of a father who found his heart in a stranger's child. But this story leaves us with a deeper, more haunting question. What defines a family? Is it blood, like the shared DNA that finally connected Sophia to Vincent and Alina? Or is it choice, like Maria's decision to stay, or Clara's vow to protect a girl who was not her own? Vincent Romano built an empire on a code of blood and loyalty, only to have it dismantled by the very same principle. In the end, his legacy wasn't the territory he controlled, but the broken circle he helped to mend. He traded power for parenthood, and in a prison cell, he may have found more peace than he ever did in a mansion. For Alina and Antonio, the cost was 2 decades of stolen life. They emerged from the shadows not as heroes, but as survivors, their bond forged in a crucible of perpetual fear. Their redemption lies in Sophia's future, a future they ensured with silence and suffering. For Clara, the nurse who lost everything for telling the truth, she found a new purpose in the middle of a crime war, proving that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important. And what of Arthur Bradford? His fall was public and total, a testament to the fact that the most dangerous monsters often wear the most respectable masks. His corruption was a poison that seeped into the city's foundations, turning institutions of care into hunting grounds. His defeat reminds us that justice, when it comes, is often delivered by the most unexpected hands. So we are left with a family portrait that defies convention: a mafia boss in prison, a mother and uncle in witness protection, a steadfast wife, a guardian nurse, and at the center, a little girl who is no longer an orphan but a nexus where all these shattered lives converge and find new meaning. The love that binds them is messy, scarred, and hard-won. It is not a fairy tale. It is something better. It is real. The broader implication here is that our identities are not fixed points but stories we are constantly rewriting. Sophia began her search with a single, desperate question. Is this my daddy? The answer was yes, but it was also so much more. Her daddy was a myth, a monster, a protector, and finally a man. Her family was a ghost, a secret, a rival, and finally, a sanctuary. In finding them, she forced them all to find better versions of themselves. The lingering question isn't about what happened next for the Romanos. It's about the unseen stories happening around us all the time. What secrets are hidden in the heirlooms we ignore? What truths are locked behind the quiet faces we pass on the street? Every family has its ghosts. Every heart has its locked locket. The real mystery is having the courage to open it. If this journey through shadows and second chances resonated with you, if it made you think about the hidden stories in your own world, then do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button below. We delve deep into the forgotten tales, the human dramas hidden behind the headlines, and the moments where ordinary people face extraordinary choices. Your subscription helps us bring more of these stories to light. Thanks for watching. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most powerful forces in the world aren't money or power. They're a photograph, a question, and the unbreakable will to find an answer.